Burpees suck. And I don't mean they suck because they're hard and they leave you out of breath. I mean they suck because they're a crappy exercise choice and most personal trainers should simply use them far less frequently than they do. Now, if you want to understand why burpees suck, we got to go back in history and figure out first, how did they come about? What was their purpose? And then we're going to have to take just a quick look at physiology to understand really what's going on. They actually suck for a multitude of reasons, but that's going to be by far the number one reason. After that, I'll then detail the other reasons why they suck. So, burpees were invented by a guy named Royal H. Burpee. In 1939, he was doing his thesis for applied physiology, so he knew about the body, he knew what he was talking about, and he was looking for a different way to assess fitness. Of course, there's push-ups, of course, there's sit-ups. Keep in mind, 1939, there's a lot less machines than there are now. And he wanted something quick, easy, that didn't require much equipment. And so he knew, now remember, he's getting his thesis, PhD, in physiology. And so he knew about the body, and he thought, well, what happened if we disrupt blood flow and see how people respond? Well, the easiest way to do that is to do what he was, his original burpee, we're going to call that the traditional burpee, which is simply where you get down into a top of the push-up position and then stand back up. And what he wanted people to do is he wanted them to do 4 of those, and then he would measure their heart rate over different intervals and see how fast they recovered. And he found that if they recovered a little bit on the fast side, they probably had pretty good fitness. Okay, so that's what we're going to call your traditional original burpee. Now, what's going on with that? I said it disrupts your physiology. Okay? So there's a lot of important organs in our body. Probably the number one is our brain. And all of our organs require blood. But the body has a little bit of a challenge, especially humans, because we stand on 2 feet. We have to get blood up to our brain, and our heart is right here. So we have to pump blood up, and particularly if we do exercises with our legs, blood goes to where the muscles are working, so then the blood will be shunted down to the legs. So the body has a special way of dealing with this. So you have baroreceptors in your blood vessels. The primary blood vessels that go up to your head and feed your brain are your carotid artery on each side of your neck. When you're watching a horror movie and someone gets stabbed and that's what's squirting out, it's usually my favorite part of the movie. Okay, but those are your carotid arteries. So think about it. If I'm standing right now, I need a fair amount of blood to get up there. So my baroreceptors are able to detect my position. They open up my carotid artery, and more blood is able to flow. As soon as I change my position, those baroreceptors then detect that. So if I drop immediately down into a push-up position, they will constrict the carotid artery because now there's more blood, is much easier to flow to the heart, so it doesn't have to work as hard, so therefore they will constrict that. Okay, so blood is made up primarily of water, right? And its job is to deliver nutrients and oxygen to the body. And so if you're here, and it's a liquid trapped inside a container, okay, and it's going to behave as a liquid. So right now, if I'm trying to get blood up to here, right, that heart is working. But as soon as I drop down, I'm here. Now, normally we drop down, the body's pretty adaptable. We do 10, 20, 30, 100 push-ups, whatever you want. You stand back up, you feel fine. But if you're here, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and you do this, and you do this repeatedly, that provides a serious challenge for your brain, basically, to regulate how much blood it's getting. And that's why so common. So that's called orthostatic hypotension. Hypotension is low blood pressure. Orthostatic is positional. All right? And so what happens is when we keep changing this position, the blood is just slamming into our head and then out of our head. It really screws up our blood pressure. Now, it doesn't affect everybody, but think of who might suffer from blood pressure issues in the first place. So certainly older adults, right? We know as we age, our arteries harden a little bit. They're not as elastic. They don't do as good a job at transporting blood. Anyone that's taking blood pressure medications, people that typically are significantly overweight, people that might suffer from vertigo. So we're talking about a pretty significant number, not the majority, but a pretty significant amount of the population. And if you ask them to do this, one, right, they're probably fine, but you don't get much out of doing one anyway. But if you say, hey, let's do 20 burpees, let's do 40 burpees, okay, that's going to provide a significant challenge. So those people are not going to want to do burpees. The other issue is that burpees aren't training what you think they're training. Yes, after a set of 20, 30, they do suck in the fact that your huffing wind, right? And you feel like you need air and oxygen, but they're just training that baroreceptor response, right? They're not really training your cardiovascular system that well because there's not really much load, right? Especially if you do your traditional burpee, which is just push up and up. The muscles are barely working on that. That's not that challenging. If you do the kind of modern or full burpee, which includes the push-up, includes the full squat, and then the jump at the top, obviously you get more muscular stimulus there. But still, that's not the hardest part of the exercise. The hardest part is simply regulating your blood pressure. So you're trying to ask yourself, is that what you want to train? Most people are doing it to train the cardiovascular system, and they're interpreting that thumping heart, which is doing its best to regulate blood pressure, as being effective for that. But you're not working on your mitochondria, you're not building capillaries, you're just working on this area to control blood flow, which some people do better than others. Right? There's very little muscular stimulus in a burpee, no matter how you set it up. Okay? In addition, there are other reasons why we really don't need to program in burpees hardly at all. Burpees are difficult to program and they're difficult to overload. Let's say you have somebody do 10 burpees and later on they did 12. Is that progress? Well, did you time how long it took them? One of the big problems with a burpee is you're in a standing position where there's no load and it's easy to rest. So the person does 10 burpees in 15 seconds and 12 burpees in 25 seconds, then that's not really progress. They just went slower, okay? If you want to do the more power or the more traditional, the more modern version where you do a push-up and then you do a squat and then you do a jump, well, how are you monitoring that? Usually we say, okay, as many burpees as you can in 30 seconds. That's going to reward speed, but that's also going to reward efficiency. That's going to reward actually low power output. I don't want to jump up and touch the ceiling. All I want to do is just clear my feet and get right back down. But where else do we want to kind of incorporate that level of efficiency at that expense for power? Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to measure burpees and make them, more effective in that, but most trainers aren't going to do that. They're not going to take the time to measure every little single detail, and so that lends a pretty big problem for them. It's almost impossible to train the phosphagen energy system when you're doing burpees, right? So you're left with glycolysis and the oxidative energy systems. Again, as a secondary system, it's really the control of the blood pressure. One of the biggest flaws in a burpee is it's a combination exercise. A combination exercise is when you combine multiple exercises. Most people are familiar with like a lunge and a lateral raise. Probably the dumbest combination exercise is when you do a row followed by a kickback. Okay, a row followed by a kickback. The reason why combination exercises typically suck is because there's almost always a weak link in there. For example, almost everyone can row a decent amount of weight and the kickback is highly limited. So the row is essentially completely ineffective. The burpee suffers from the same issue, and we'll take both burpees as we look at. So we have the traditional, some people call that kind of like a gorilla burpee. That's the one, again, where you just get into push-up position and then you just stand up, right? Well, what's not so great about that? Well, we're down in there. Okay, we're not spending much time in that position. If you want to train that position, do something like a bear crawl. Could be stationary, where you just lift up hands and feet, because that's probably going to be an easier exercise anyway. You could have someone do a moving bear crawl, or you could do a plank where you transition from your hands to your elbows while you're doing a plank. That would take care of that motion. Then simply superset that with squats. So when you have a combination exercise, it's almost always better to superset the things you are trying to train so that you can set up an appropriate load versus combine them. Let's take the modern or the full burpee. That involves the push-up, that involves the squat, that involves the jump. Again, regular burpees, we're not rewarded for a high jump. Squats are pretty easy with our body weight. Push-ups can be somewhat challenging. But instead of telling someone, okay, do 40 of those, 40 burpees, right, which certainly is admittedly challenging, but again, the hardest thing is simply regulating your blood pressure. What if we had someone do 40 push-ups, and now we can actually maybe add a band, elevate their feet, do a little something to make that exercise harder. Then they do 40 squats. Why limit ourselves to body weight squats? How about they do goblet squats, right? Hold a medicine ball, overhead squats, whatever you want to do. And then jumps. And instead of just little baby 2-inch jumps, let's have them do some jumps to a box. Jumps up on a tire. Reach up and touch the top of a basketball net or a rim, right? Imagine supersetting 40 push-ups, 40 appropriately prescribed squats, and then you probably wouldn't do 40 jumps that way, but maybe 10 then high power output jumps. Think of the effect that that's going to give on the person You're gonna get the same cardiovascular effect, right? Actually better, because now they can regulate their blood pressure and actually push themselves. And then of course you're gonna get much greater muscular stimulus, whether you're going for endurance or for power. So almost always when you come across a combination exercise, ask yourself, wouldn't it be better to simply superset the different elements that are involved, right? And see how that would work out. And if you really like the idea, well, a burpee teaches someone how to get off of the ground, well, not necessarily, right? If the person's that detrained, that really that's a workout for them, they shouldn't be doing burpees in the first place, right? If the person's super fit, burpees probably aren't a great exercise either without being modified. So really instead have them do the sitting rising test, right? That's where you simply get down on the ground, okay, come back up. For people that struggle with that, they need to be taught, usually they're on the ground, move to a lunge position, the bottom of a lunge, and then just stand up, okay? But that's a subject for another video. Most people don't like burpees, right? And again, even people that are willing to push themselves relatively hard don't like it. There's that E in enjoyment in the FIT principle when prescribing exercise. So we want to factor that in. And the reason they don't enjoy it is, again, because of this weird, unusual, my getting tunnel vision, I feel like I'm going to pass out. Obviously, if someone really passes out, you have a significant danger issue there. So the enjoyment issue is gone for most. Now, obviously, admittedly, if someone absolutely loves it and that is what they want to train, then you might think about incorporating in the plan. But for most people, they're willing to work hard, right? It's not just their babies, but this is a different kind of feel because it's training a different system. Finally, when we try to master important exercises, you want to ask yourself, well, what am I good at once I do that exercise? Okay, if you can do 90 push-ups, you're good at a lot of things. If you can do 20 pull-ups, you're now good at a lot of stuff. If you can run fast, if you can jump high, that translates to other things. Well, what are you good at when you can do, in the military, it used to be 40 burpees, was kind of the king. That you want to do 40 burpees before World War II, you had to be able to do 40 burpees to get excellent, and that was the old kind of traditional burpees in 1 minute, right? Well, what are you good at? Tough to know. I would argue actually that you're simply good at regulating your blood pressure effectively, but you're not necessarily, you may not even be able to do 40 straight push-ups. You probably can do 40 bodyweight squats, but I wouldn't call that super impressive. Okay, there's no jump involved in those. So what are you actually good at when you can do those burpees? Generally, not a whole lot. That's another reason why they're probably not worth spending all of your time and your blood, sweat, and tears on. Now, is burpees appropriate for anybody? Yeah, so if we go back to the kind of a beginning of the story, we mentioned that Burpee invented this in 1939. Well, what came right next? World War II. World War II needed ways to get people in shape. They had young, healthy, fit, traditionally males that were working out. And honestly, probably for a soldier, I think you could make an argument, I don't claim to be a soldier expert, but that, being able to jump down on the ground, then jump back up, run, probably while your heart is just pounding in your ears, they actually need a pretty good baroreceptor reflex to be able to handle that. So you might argue that a burpee is a proper, specific exercise for a fighter, be it a martial artist, be it an actual soldier, other people like pilots or gymnasts where their head is going to change position. You might argue, okay, well those people actually need, that's an important response for those people to train. So again, if you put a burpee into a program for a specific reason, which is, I want my person to be able to regulate their blood pressure under duress, under different specific situations, great. But if you just decide, I don't know what else to do, let's just give this guy a little bit of cardio, just think, is this what we're trying to train? Is this all you want, is that baroreceptor reflex, or are you actually trying to improve their VO2 max, their cardiovascular system, their muscular system, okay, their power, build size, build muscle? If any of those are your goals, then burpees suck.